Rapture becomes her, Chapter 6. Matthew Jocelyn, reputed by many to be one of the handsomest men in the country, stalked into the room. Thomas, favored by some to be even more handsome than his older brother, followed him. Trailing in the rear was Simon the youngest, and, in the opinion of the largest contingent, truly the handsomest man in England. All three men possessed the jostling charm and attractiveness, and had inherited the stunning azure eyes, black hair, and the tall athletic bodies for which the family was known. There were of course differences. Matthew was the tallest, Thomas the shortest, though not more than 2 inches separated the three brothers. All had the same similarly chiseled features, but Thomas's face was a trifle narrower than his brother's, giving him, Emily always thought, the look of a most handsome fox. Matthew's chin was classical perfection, but Simon had the squarish jaw, and, in Emily's opinion, the best smile. That smile and a quick wink were flashed her way as he entered the room behind his brothers. Matthew was surprised to find that Barnabas had company. His ignored expression immediately changed. Smiling politely at Anne and Emily, he said, "I beg your pardon, ladies. I did not realize my cousin had visitors." "We are not visitors exactly," Anne said after acknowledging the newcomers. "Lord Jocelyn rescued us when our buggy was stuck in a ditch, and our mare went lame. After helping us leave the vehicle, he graciously offered us shelter." She smiled at Barnabas. He was most gallant. Matthew, looking as if he had swallowed a hedgehog, murmured, "Really? How heroic of him." Barnaby, lounging at one side of the table, his long legs stretched out in front of him, grinned. "Even we crude Americans know how to do the right thing, cousin." "I don't believe that my brother," said Tom Jocelyn austerely, "ever called you crude." "No," said Simon, walking over to help himself to a cup of coffee. "Matt never called him crude, but I seem to remember," he smiled wickedly, and looked at his eldest brother, "that you once referred to him as that uncouth barbarian." "Uncouth?" Barnaby asked, a gleam in his black eyes. "Surely not." Matthew flushed and said testily, "You know we have had our differences, cousin, and in a moment of anger I may have allowed my tongue to run away with me." Under Barnaby's calm gaze he almost fidgeted. Stiffly he added, "I apologize." Emily's eyes went from one man to the other, searching for the family resemblance. She could find little beyond the impression that Lord Jocelyn and Matthew had a shared ancestry. Lord Jocelyn was big and tough-looking, his features lacking the Greek perfection of Matthew's, and as she had thought earlier, even seated, Lord Jocelyn commanded the attention of everyone in the room. She bit her lip to keep from smiling. Compared to Lord Jocelyn, Matthew, a noted Corinthian, more resembled a pretty pink of the sun, while Lord Jocelyn she swallowed. Lord Jocelyn looked like a lazy tiger seizing up prey, very large, very powerful, and dangerous. "Oh, for God's sake, climb down off your high horse and help yourself to something to eat, and sit down," Barnaby said without heat. "I'm sure if positions were reversed, I would have called you a great many worse names." "Handsomely done," murmured Simon. "Yes, it was," Barnaby agreed. Smiling at Simon, he added, "And you need to quit throwing the cat amongst the pigeons." Simon looked crushed. "But how else shall I find amusement?" he asked mournfully, the blue eyes dancing. "Oh, stop trying to act like a court jester and behave yourself," Tom said, approaching the sideboard. After pouring himself some coffee, he took a sip and made a face. "Good God, this is colder than yesterday's porridge. Ring for Peckham and order us some hot coffee." Barnaby's brow lifted, his eyes, the expression unreadable on Thomas, but he said nothing. As the seconds passed, Thomas' cheeks deepened to a hard red. Barnaby let him dangle for a moment longer, then breaking the growing tension, said softly, "You know where the bell rope is. With my permission, you may ring for him." "I didn't mean to be rude," Tom stuttered. "It is just that—" "I know," Barnaby said wearily. "Until a few months ago, your brother was considered the heir to all of this, and all of you were used to running tame through the place and treating it as your own." Her sympathy aroused. Anne said, "This must be very hard for all of you." "Not for me," Simon said cheerfully, making himself comfortable beside Emily at the table. He glanced at Emily. "I was never in a running for its title." Emily grinned back at him. "I know that, you fool, and so does everyone else." "Fool?" Simon clenched his chest. "Fair maiden, how can you be so cruel? Your words have cut me to the quick. I shall never recover." Barnaby's eyes narrowed at the easy intimacy between Emily and Simon. He hadn't missed the smile or the wink Simon had sent him when he walked into the room earlier. He liked Simon. He hoped he wasn't going to have to show the impudent cub his punishing right. Not at all amused by Simon's antics, Matthew's lips tightened. "Must you always jest? It is entirely inappropriate." "Matt is right," said Thomas, having recovered his aplomb. "You should mind that wayward tongue of yours." Simon's teasing manner vanished. "Now why am I not surprised that you agree with our godlike sibling? Tell me, brother dear, have you ever had an original thought of your own?" "Oh, for heaven's sake," Matthew said, "cease this childish baiting." Innocently, Simon said, "Well, I have wondered. All he does is pat at you." Thomas' fist clenched, and he stepped towards Simon. Simon, an expression of gleeful anticipation on his handsome face, stood up. Barnaby had observed the dissension between the brothers previously, and he was tempted to let the scene play out, his money on Simon sending Thomas crashing to the floor, but deciding that a dust-up in the morning room wasn't proper entertainment for the ladies, he intervened. All of this is most amusing, but is there a reason for this unexpected visit?" he asked, "other than your enjoyment of my company?" Simon grinned at him and sat back down. Thomas swung away and gave a violent yank on the black velvet bell rope hanging at one end of the sideboard. Matthew glared at Simon a moment before turning to Barnaby. "Actually, there is," he began. His eyes fell upon Emily and Anne's rapt faces, and he muttered, "But it can wait until your guests have departed." Peckham's entrance into the room provided a timely interruption. The butler smiled warmly at the newest arrivals. Barnaby ordered fresh coffee and more food. Before Peckham hurried away, he said, "And please see that rooms are prepared for my guests and any servants they have brought with them." Matthew smiled at Barnaby, a smile transforming his hardy features and giving a glimpse of the great charm for which he was famous. "I wasn't certain you would allow us to stay." Barnaby shrugged. "It's an unusual situation for all of us. There is no reason to make it worse." A slow smile curved his mouth. "Whether we like it or not, we are, after all, family." "Well," exclaimed Anne, a short while later, as she and Emily were driven away from Windermere in a comfortable coach Lord Jocelyn had provided, "that was most interesting, wasn't it? I was certain that Tom and Simon would come to blows." "Which isn't the least unusual for them," Emily answered. "Even as children, the three of them were always at each other's throats, especially Tom and Simon. I cannot count the number of times both of them have given the other one a bloody nose or a black eye," she frowned. "But I wonder what brought them to Windermere. Perhaps Matthew was trying to be kind." To the man who had just snatched the title and an estate like windmill out of his grasp? Inquired Emily with a lifted brow. I'd be more inclined to think he came to murder him. Emily, never say such a thing, Anne cried, shocked. You forget the circumstances under which I first met Lord Jocelyn. He was more dead than alive, and you'll never convince me that someone hadn't gone to a great deal of trouble to arrange for him to die that night. If Jeb had inspired him, he would be dead. I'd forgotten that Anne committed. Unhappily, she added, and of course it would be to Matthew's benefit if Lord Jocelyn were to die. Barnaby was very aware that of everyone, Matthew had the most to gain by his death, but he couldn't quite put the face of a murderer on him. Having bid the ladies good-bye, the four gentlemen wandered into the study, and covertly studying Matthew's features as he poured him brandy. Barnaby still didn't see his oldest cousin in the role of murderer. Once the gentlemen had been served brandy, or port in the case of Thomas, and were scattered around the elegantly masculine room, Barnaby asked, So to what do I owe this honor? Lord Paget, Simon said. Matthew standing near one end of a massive black gold-veined marble fireplace threw Simon an annoyed glance. At the opposite end of the fireplace were his two brothers. Simon was sprawled comfortably in a black leather chair, trimmed in small brass buttons, and he grinned back at his brother. Barnaby frowned. Lord Paget, I'm afraid I do not recognize that name. I don't believe you've met. He is a friend of mine, said Tom, standing to the side of Matthew. I happened to pass Paget on the street in London, and he mentioned that he just returned from Eastbourne, where he keeps his own yacht, and had noticed that the Jocelyn yacht was missing from her berth. Said she'd been gone for several days. Naturally, I thought Matthew should be informed. Naturally, said Barnaby, deciding that he much preferred Simon's irreverence to Thomas's self-righteous tale-bearing. As you are aware, Tom Matthew said carefully, this is not precisely the yachting season. Thomas was concerned you may have taken the boat out and drowned, Barnaby asked dryly from his position at the other end of the fireplace, not far from where Simon sat. Simon snickered and Matthew looked pained. Thomas glared at Simon. Why you must always act a fool? When Simon would have risen to the challenge, Barnaby turned his head and stopped him with a look. Slightly abashed, Simon sank down deeper into his chair. Better a fool than a prissy old maid, he muttered into his brandy so lowly only Barnaby heard him. Barnaby agreed with Simon, and he hadn't missed the fact that they divided themselves into two camps. At one end of the fireplace stood Matthew and Thomas, almost shoulder to shoulder, and he and Simon had taken up positions at the other end. To anyone viewing the scene, it would appear that Simon was aligned with him. But dare he trust Simon? I could not pretend, Matthew said from between gritted teeth, that your death wouldn't be to my advantage or that I would shed tears over your grave. But dash it all, give me some credit. Matthew took a deep breath, throttling back his temper. Knowing the yacht was missing, it seemed appropriate to find out all was well with you and the yacht. Since Simon was already staying with me at Monk's Abbey, when Tom brought me the news of the yacht being missing, it seemed reasonable that the three of us came to all. None of us, he half snarled, came here in the guise of vultures. The pale blue eyes flashing, he said tightly. And I resent the implication that we did. Barnaby believed him. His cousin was clearly offended by the notion that Barnaby thought him capable of taking pleasure in another man's death, even if he didn't like him. Matthew would meet him head-on in a fair fight. Of that much, Barnaby was convinced. I acquit you of that, Barnaby said quietly, and I apologize for implying your actions were anything less than those of an honorable man. Thank you, Matthew said stiffly. Did you know about the yacht? Simon asked, looking at Barnaby closely. Barnaby considered telling them the truth about the night he was dragged from the channel. But decided against it for several reasons. Except for a handful of people, no one else knew the truth, and he'd just as soon keep it that way. Just thinking of explaining why he and the others had lied about the cause of his indisposition made him wince. Worse yet, if Emily and Anne were to be believed, just his mere presence at Windermere had caused enough gossip in the area as it was. A near brush with death would be a 9 days' wonder in the neighborhood, and he just as soon avoid enduring that. Thank you very much. Blending what he thought to be true with fiction, Barnaby said, "The yacht was in Eastbourne 2 weeks ago last Tuesday. I saw it when I passed through on my way here. If it has gone missing, it had to be after that." Thoughtfully, Simon said, "I'll wager it's that bloody Noel's game." He shook his head. "And if they stole her, most likely she's at the bottom of the channel, or so the skies she'll never be recognized." Knowing full well that the yacht was indeed at the bottom of the channel, Barnaby asked, "The Noel's gang? That's the second time I've heard that name. Who are they?" Matthew sighed. "They are a vicious band of smugglers and rule this area. The revenues and customs have been trying to break their back for years to no avail. Nearly everyone for miles around here, and Monk's Abbey for the matter, belongs to the gang or is related in some manner to the members of the gang, or terrified of them." Thomas took a dainty swallow of his port. "Gossip has it that they have a wealthy London backer, and that enables them to snare the largest share of the smuggling market. The amount of contraband they move is said to be phenomenal." Matthew nodded. "That they've had a wealthy financier behind them for the past 6 years to 8 years isn't a secret. Before that, Will Noel and his brethren were like any other gang in the area, but with a great deal of money behind them, they've become quite wonderful, a force to be obeyed and feared. Seems to me that if the authorities exposed this backer, the problem would be solved," Barnaby said. "Yes, of course, but no one seems to know anything about him. He's like a ghost." Matthew looked unhappy. "And unfortunately, he supplies the Noel's gang with his funds to buy larger and larger shipments of contraband and enables them to hire more men and gives them more influence and power," Matthew said. "The revenue service pay is so major that many of the men stationed here to stamp out smuggling are quite willing to accept bribes and lie, comfortably ignoring what is right under their noses. Smuggling is a way of life along our coastal areas, especially here in Essex and Kent," Simon stated wryly. "You'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who isn't touched by it one way or another." He cocked a brow. "Did you know that decades ago one of our less illustrious ancestors was a smuggler?" He grinned. "It's said that most of the family wealth is based on his enterprising use of the tunnels and cellars beneath Windermere. Legend has it he stored enormous amounts of contraband until it was safe to make a run to London." Barnaby sat up. "Tunnels? Underneath Windermere? The old place is full of them," Simon said. Thomas chuckled. "When we were children, Matt, Simon, and I used to play in them every time we came to visit. It was a favorite place for all of us to gather and pretend we were dangerous smugglers." Miss Townsend, Faith Gilbert, and Miss Bartford, and even from time to time Geoffrey Townsend joined us. There were some others, but I've forgotten their names at the moment. It was great fun, I could tell you that. A reminiscent smile on his lips, Matthew said, "Oh Lord, the grand times we had chasing those screaming girls are acting as their defenders against the wicked smugglers." "So having people around like the Noel's gang is common?" Barnaby asked, filing away the information about the tunnels. Simon shook his head. "Most of the smuggling is done by small groups of fishermen, despite to help their families, but the Noel's gang, they are not to be trifled with. They're vicious. Indeed, I've been hearing gossip of a small gang operated in this neighborhood for the past few years," Tom said. adding almost with relish that they won't last much longer. Will Noel and his friends will take care of them. They don't tolerate competition of any kind. He glanced at Matthew. Remember 4 or 5 years ago when they... I don't think that our cousin needs to be regaled with tales of the antics of violent criminals, Matthew said. Barnaby was very curious about the Noel's gang, and his curiosity had much to do with the distant possibility that they represented a danger to Emily and the Gilberts. He would have liked to press for more information, but decided there was no reason to reveal his interest to the Jostens. There were other ways of finding out what he needed to know. The information about the tunnels and the connection with smuggling was interesting, he reminded himself, and would bear looking into sometime in the following weeks. The gentlemen parted for the evening, and Barnaby was thoughtful as he entered his bedroom and walked into the dressing room. Entering the dressing room, he spied the enrolled and gold-embroidered black robe that Lamb had laid across the chair for him and began to undress. He rang for Lamb and finished stripping out of his clothes, then shrugged into the robe. When Lamb arrived, he was in the sitting room adjoining the bedroom, looking down at the yellow and orange flames gleaming on the hearth of the big stone fireplace. Waving a hand toward the array of liquids kept on the top of the long sideboard on the other side of the room, he said, "Help yourself and pour me a brandy while you're at it." After pouring both full sniffers of brandy, Lamb walked back and handed Barnaby one of the snifters. Taking a seat, he stretched his legs toward the fire and looked inquiringly at Barnaby. "I want you to find out what you can about a fellow named Kelsey," said Barnaby. "He may have been here this afternoon." John shook his head in amazement. "How in the hell did you know about him and that Jameson? Your head groom sent him away with a flea in his ear?" "I didn't know about that, but I did know that he was the cause of the Townsend ladies in the ditch." Barnaby replied, "I overheard Miss Townsend say something to her stepmother about that wretch Kelsey running them off the road. Since the accident occurred outside the main gate to Windmere, it seemed probable that he had been here. Well, I could tell you that Kelsey showed up at the stables when I was leaving late this afternoon with Jameson. Excellent man, by the way, and was looking for a job. Jameson already knew him until recently. Kelsey was Squire Townsend's head stableman. Kelsey was drunk and belligerent, and not at all the sort of person you want on your staff, even if you were looking to hire someone. Jameson tried politely to turn him away, but Kelsey would have none of it and grew abusive." John grinned. "The upshot was that Jameson gave him as pretty a right uppercut as I have ever seen, and after Kelsey had picked himself up off the ground, ordered him from the estate." Barnaby considered the situation, wondering if he should pursue it further. No permanent harm had been done, and the accident had given him a chance to spend time with Emily Townsend. He let it go for now, he decided, but Kelsey had best not come to his attention again. "Do you want me to find out more about him?" John asked. Barnaby shook his head. "No, let it go for now. But tell me, have you heard anything about a gang of smugglers called the Noel's Gang? The leader is someone called Will Noels." Lamb nodded. "My first day here, one of the footmen took far too much pleasure in telling me all about Will Noels and his gang." Lamb swirled his brandy around and sniffed it. "I think he thought to frighten me." "And did he?" Barnaby asked, grinning. Lamb snorted. "Hardly. But why are you interested in a gang of smugglers?" Barnaby hesitated. Lamb knew about his brush with death in the Channel, and that the fisherman Jed Brown had pulled him to safety, but nothing about Emily Townsend or the fact that he suspected that Jed Brown and the Gilberts were smugglers. And he wagered a pocketful of gold guineas that they were the same small gang that Thomas had alluded to tonight. He seldom kept secrets from John, and he saw no reason not to tell him the whole truth. Pulling on his air, Barnaby said, "There's a bit more to my near drowning than I told you." "I knew it!" Lamb exclaimed, sitting upright. "You've always been a bad liar, and there was something. So what really happened?" Succinctly, Barnaby relayed the sequence of events that had occurred that night at the Crown. When he finished speaking, Lamb was grinning from ear to ear. So it's the smuggling Amazon who caught your interest. I suspected it was more than just kindness that prompted your actions tonight. No, I am not interested in either of the Townsend ladies, except as my neighbors, Barnaby lied, and almost swore at the knowing look Lamb slanted at him. But I owe Emily Townsend and the Gilberts a debt of gratitude, he continued darkly. And if keeping them from harm at the hands of the Noel gang helps repay some of their kindness, then I am more willing to do it. He grimaced. And out of the sight of Lieutenant Den, the young man is everything the Revenue Service needs most desperately: honest, dedicated, and determined. I am willing to help him in any way I can to stop the Noel's gang, but he'll need to be guarded away from the Gilbert group. Lamb shrugged, but there was a mocking gleam in his eyes. Of course, he purred. You are being good and noble and doing nothing more than repaying a debt. How very, very lord of the manor. Tell me what you know about the Noel's gang, Barnaby said, in a voice that even Lamb obeyed. His teasing air left him in frowning. Lamb said, the footman hasn't been the only person to mention them since I arrived at Windmere. From things I overheard, it appears that several of your staff are related to them either by blood or marriage, or work with them upon occasion. He shook his head, almost to the man or woman there on the side of the smugglers in a line against the revenuers and custom officials. Barnaby sighed. I was afraid you were going to say that. How many of my staff had ties to the gang? Lamb hesitated, while they talked freely in general terms. I am not privy to anything specific, but upon occasion conversations come to an abute end when I enter the room, but I've come to some conclusions on my own. I think your coachman's youngest son is part of the gang, and that the cook's daughter is married to a fellow who sometimes helped the gang move their goods. One of the scullery maids let something drop that leads me to believe that her father does the same, and Mrs. Bartlett has some connection to the gang, but I don't know what it is. But what do you know of the gang itself? Barnaby asked, frowning. Not a lot, and how much more is true, and how much is exaggerated to impress and intimidate the American newcomer, I have no way of knowing, he warned. When Barnaby motioned for him to continue, Lamb said it's a large gang, over 60 members, if what I heard is true, and Will Noel is the leader. From being a lowly member of a fishing crew 8 years ago, he has risen to be the captain of a small fishing fleet, and owns the largest inn in the area. The Ram's Head, Lamb grimaced, quite the success story, and I gather that nearly every lad in the area aspires to follow in his path. And where would I find this Noel's? At the Ram's Head, you're Mrs. Gilbert's competition. His eyes met Barnaby's. There were questions about her husband's death 4 or 5 years ago, one night after he visited the Ram's Head, to object to Noel's accosting several regulars of the Crown and implying that it would be better for their health if they changed their lines to the Ram's Head. It appears that anyone who opposes him comes to an unfortunate end. Nasty sounding fellow our Noel, Barnaby murmured. Not someone to be trifled with, if gossip is to be believed. Barnaby took a long swallow of his brandy. I think, he said slowly, as he set the sniffer down on the mantel, that I shall have to see for myself if the Ram's Head holds as much charm for me as the Crown. Not liking the expression on Barnaby's face, Lamb said, did I mention that several members of the gang regularly frequent the Ram's Head, and that Noel's is seldom without a half-dozen or so of his men around him? Barnaby shrugged. I doubt they'll attack me in broad daylight in a public place. I worry less about them attacking you than I do you starting a rumpus, thinking to champion your Amazon and the Gilberts. Barnaby looked innocent. What a ridiculous notion, as if I would lower myself to such vulgar actions as brawling in the traffic. But as a member of the aristocracy, he said, twinkling at him, and one of the largest landholders in the district. It is my civic duty to see to it. If the gossip is true that a nefarious fellow like Noel's doesn't continue to flout the law, I don't suppose I can convince you that it would be unwise to antagonize Noel's. His expression bored. Barnaby examined his nails. Antagonize? Now why would you think such a thing? Lamb's gaze narrowed. He knew that deceptively bored expression of old, and knew that no matter what he said, that there was no stopping Barnaby's indecision. The Rams had one day soon, and no doubt he thought viciously, reckoned Harvey in the place. Christ, Lamb swore, at least let me accompany you. Barnaby smiled sunnily at him. But, of course, surely you didn't think I was fool enough to stick my head in the lion's den without you beside me?